Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mindset for Mars podcast. Today, I have an amazing guest with me. Um, Her name is Phnam Bagely, and she is partner and creative director at Nonfiction, which is an award-winning creative studio specializing in industrial design, branding, user experience design, space architecture, engineering, and strategy. And what they say is we turn science fiction into reality for a better future, which I absolutely love. And she's also a graduate of the only space architecture masters in the world, which I think is beyond cool. So with that intro, I'm gonna let Nam talk more about it. First of all, talk about the masters, talk about why space, and talk about her work, which is super cool.
Hi, Sorana. Nice to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. So yeah, space. A lot of people actually ask me why I'm interested in space. Why would I not be interested in space? Would be the real question, right? Everything about space, especially right now in the 2020s, is so incredibly exciting with the private sector taking over and accelerating, the innovation and development of putting humans back in space, back on the moon, and soon on Mars. So that's something that has been with me since I was a kid. Not particularly space travel because I always thought it was very far from where I was, but space in general. So growing up, I wanted to be an astrophysicist and an artist at the same time, right? Back in the early 80s, that was fairly uncommon, right? You were either a left brain person or a right brain person,
Yeah.
and presenting yourself as someone with both qualities was out of the norm, and I was fine with that. So because I'm also a fairly practical person and I'm not particularly interested in research, I decided to change my careers to industrial design and space architecture. So, industrial design is the practice of designing physical objects, some with electronics, some without, that can be mass manufactured. So I went to school for that in France and in Denmark. And then after that, I went to school at the University of Houston at a program called SIXA. That is, as you said, the only master's program in space architecture in the world. It was back then, and I believe it still is. And just to give you an idea of how small it was, when I graduated, were four people
Wow.
who graduated that year in 2006. So yeah, so since then I've been in the US. I actually quit the space world for about 10, 12 years, mainly because when I was studying it and immersed in it in the mid 2000s, I I realized that a lot of emphasis was put on systems engineering and kind of like designing spacecrafts and habitat the way we've been doing them, right? Which is taking taking the needs and the environmental systems and then cramming them in a space that is barely livable. But the human aspect of these architecture was quite secondary and sometimes tertiary. And what I wanted to do really is to focus on designing spacecrafts and extraplanetary habitat that puts humans at the core of it, right? What kind of needs physically, psychologically, sociologically do astronauts have when they are isolated from their home, which is planet Earth, for long stretches of time, right? It's a little bit less of a problem when you go to the moon for like a day or two. But when you go to Mars, which takes 6 to 9 months to go to, stay there for a year and a half, and then 6 months back, that's going to have different implications in the design. So I wanted to come back recently. I did it in 2020. I came back in the space industry and really took all of my experience in designing things for planet Earth, and inject that into the space industry. So what I did for 15 years for Planet Earth is that I designed a lot of healthcare products, transformational wearables and devices that use deep tech technology, and different types of products, in transportation, in baby products, sustainability products, systems of different kinds. And then 5 years ago, I started this company called Nonfiction, and that is all that we do, right? Clients come to us. Clients can be startups, they can be mid-sized company, they can be big corporations, they can be governments, and they come to us with a specific problem. And what we do is that we help them solve that problem through design. It can be through design thinking, empathizing with a specific subject, and then prototyping something that justifies a solution. And we can do all the work, of product development as well, for mass manufacturing, if that is what is required for the product. We also work a lot in education. So we're currently redesigning the educational system of Singapore as well as Japan, and yeah, that's a lot of integrating systems, having to do with sustainability, social impact, emotional intelligence, integration of technology, communication, and alignment with the future of work. So yeah, so that's in a nutshell what's been happening in the last 20 years of my life.
Wow. That sounds like 3 lifetimes for a lot of people. That's amazing. I really like what when you were talking about the fact that in designing some of these systems, the humans were kind of secondary or even tertiary. And you talked about, say, looking at their psychological needs, their social needs. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what are the concepts that you looked at, and how did that help you look at designing spaces differently? How would you revolutionize them? What are some of the ideas that you inject into creating these spaces differently?
Yeah, so a little bit of context on why this is important. So if you look in the early 1960s, when we start sending humans to space, it was all about surviving, right? If you look at the castle in which Yuri Gagarin was shot up to space, the thing is not something you want to hang out in for like 3 hours. It's tiny. It can be quite dangerous if something goes wrong, right? And then now on aboard the ISS, people stay up there, months at a time, sometimes a year, and people are not surviving anymore. They're living up there. It becomes their home in some ways. So they eat every day. They go to the bathroom, they sleep, they have their personal time, they work, they do experiments. Very busy schedule up there, but if you look at what the ISS look like, everything is white and gray and blue, and it's very cold, and the light is very neutral, and there's stuff everywhere, right? There's no up and down when you're floating in microgravity, so every single wall, top to bottom, is filled with equipment or tools or things that are visually very crowding. And I among other people believe that you cannot send people to very long-term missions, let's say to Mars for 2.5 3 years, with these kind of conditions. Something is going to go wrong, and it takes a toll on you visually, even if some astronauts may say that, oh, it doesn't bother them. There's a lot of subconscious that's happening, that's actually affecting them psychologically and physically. Now, what we want to do as architects is eliminate as much of that crowdiness as much as possible, hiding them behind, closed doors or drawers or whatever, and really replace it, that drab kind of like lighting and colors, with things that really show life. And what shows life more than color or texture or scents or smells or things you can touch and things that react to each other, right? We have access to technology today that can make something physical look and feel different depending on what kind of light or projection mapping you attach to it. And you can do that from the eye as well, including VR, AR, MR, and really creating the environment that is changing based on what is needed for the well-being of the astronauts. And then you can inject our knowledge of color psychology, right? There are certain colors that open the appetite, for example, like red and pink. And there are other colors that are very calming, reduces, high blood pressure, like the color blue, for example, certain hues of blue. And so we can control that, with systems that are very close to what Philips Hue is doing. But there are multiple advantages to that, not only on the psychology of the people who are going to be in this environment, but also on the plants, right? A lot of vertical farming specialists are playing with the idea of manipulating the wavelengths of LED lights in order to cater the flavor, the appearance, and the color of certain fruits that you can grow in hydroponics, for example. Like I don't know what the wavelengths are, but like if you beam a certain light on tomatoes, you can make it taste sour versus sweet versus something else. Wow. Which is pretty incredible. Yeah. And humans are kind of the same, right? And here on Earth, when we walk outside, we are surrounded by man-made buildings. We're surrounded by trees, by nature, by air, by wind. All of these things are kind of taken away when you're in a completely artificial environment. So how do we re-inject that? So our, conscious and subconscious feel like they have a hold on the environment that's a little bit more familiar.
Wow, that's really fascinating stuff. I mean, if you think about it, and I think now we're realizing it even more, how much environments impact us, especially because most of the planet has been stuck in their homes for such a long time. And I think most people were taking for granted that they would go to a space that was designed differently and that they could go outside and it would affect their mood. And so I think we're realizing it even more. And you're absolutely right. When you look at the International Space Station, it all looks very clinical, almost. And how do you live in that environment for 3 years if you go to Mars, or if you go to the moon for months at a time?
Yeah, and you have to remember that when you're on the ISS, you still see the Earth, right? And if something goes wrong, it's right there. When you go to Mars, you can't come back to Earth if something's wrong. I mean, not quickly, right?
It's true. You're right. Psychologically, it's a very, very different endeavor. It's space, but it's deep space. It's not the orbit anymore. That's absolutely incredible. When I was doing the research on your projects, I came across this project that you did. I believe it was for your master's or maybe for something else that involved the space university. I saw the design, and you guys were imagining what it would look like, what kind of students. Can you talk more about that project? I know it's it's a hypothetical project, but I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah. So this is actually a project that was put together by the World Design Organization and the ISS National Laboratory that was put together in October of last year. So they came to us wanting to explore the idea of designing in space for life on Earth, right? So one question that we get asked a lot is like, why do we dump so many billions of dollars in the space industry when there are so many problems on Earth, right? Any conference probably has to answer that question. Well, if you look at a lot of technology that we have access to today on a daily basis, the materials that we surround ourselves with, the GPS that's on our cell phone, the internet, a lot of the things, they are they come directly from development done in the space industry. And in support of that, we wanted to continue that tradition of using space, using microgravity, using orbital structures to help develop what's going on Earth. So one of the greatest and biggest organization on Earth is a university. So university, especially in the US, are very, very large. Right, and they are typically divided in 3 main branches. So you have the STEM or STEAM branch, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, and then you have the You have the humanities, where you have the arts, and I think law is under it, and a lot of disciplines like this. And then you have social science, so I have everything having to do with psychology, sociology, and the relationship between humans. So that is how we design an early concept of what an orbital university would be, where there would be a representation of these three branches of typical universities in a spacecraft, and that is in the shape of a sphere. And so it'd be three rings representing these three big categories. And what we want to do is really sending people up there, sending staff, faculty, students, researchers up in microgravity environments, and really pushing research and pushing innovation that way, right? For example, if you are a biologist today, you might be interested in knowing how to grow, food or plants in general up in microgravity, right? There are a lot of limitations right now. We don't, there are certain things that we can grow reliably, but for the most part, it doesn't grow that well. And we also have limitation on Earth, right? For example, in hydroponics, you can grow lettuce, you can grow peppers and tomatoes and certain fruits and berries easily. But when it comes to like more nutritious food, like you have to use soil or aquaponics or other systems. So the more we know how to grow in an extreme environment like orbital microgravity, the more we can actually serve communities on Earth that are that where agriculture is very scarce, and conflict actually is coming from this scarcity. A lot of what's wrong on Earth is due to a lack of abundance of food, abundance of safety, abundance of everything that makes us happy individuals. And so the more we use technology to create abundance, the more we believe peace on Earth is going to gradually take over all of this. So, and on top of that, we have to fight global warming and all the consequences that come with it. Cyclical consequences like hurricanes and earthquakes and droughts and all of these things. Most of the coastal countries or cities or towns that are where a lot of people live in today in the world are going to disappear in the next few decades. So where do you move those people? What are they going to eat? How are they going to have access to that? Are we going to have to import everything, or will they be able to actually sustain themselves using technology they can buy or develop themselves?
That's amazing. And you know what I was just thought about when you were describing what would happen at a university in orbit is that it's it's the overview effect. And actually it's very interesting. I'm just going to give some background on the overview effect. It's a term that was coined by space philosopher Frank White, and it basically means astronauts, when they go into space, they see Earth from afar, and they suddenly have this incredible realization that we're all connected, that Earth is all one, all kinds of insights about what this planet means, which is sometimes hard to have it when you live on it and you're kind of up close to it. And a lot of them come back and they do conservation work. They do, they have all these spiritual insights. So that's really the overview effect. And what's really interesting is that Phnam and we met at a roundtable that is organized by Frank White, that brings together all kinds of people who are interested in space and in furthering the overview effect. So I think it would be phenomenal, in my opinion, to have that kind of university and to send as many people there, because the insights that you get, and it happens not just with space, but with anything, having that kind of perspective, being able to be far enough from something that you see the full picture, gives you extraordinary perspective. So anybody who is able to be in orbit for a while and look at the planet from afar is bound to expand their mind in a way that is very hard to do when you're actually walking on the planet. So I think that will just be incredible. And not just for science. From what I remember, you guys were talking about art as well. You gave the example of a potential art student. Maybe you can elaborate. I think this is very interesting stuff because it stimulates people's imagination, and it really does answer the question of why would you, exactly what you were talking about, why would you pour so much money into space when there's so many problems to solve? I do get that question all the time as well. So I think it's important. It's important. It's definitely part of my mission to show people, to really help them imagine all of the incredible things that would happen if we could visit space more and live there and study there.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to art, you know, what's wonderful about art is that it gets to the string, it gets to the emotional very quickly. And artists, through times, have always tried to find new ways of expressing themselves. And right now we have all the media of the world to do that, physical, multisensory, things that you find in museums, things that happen in front of your eyes. A lot of things are art. But what happens if you take out gravity?
Mm.
What does art become? How do you interact with things? What happens when art is orbiting planet Earth? What kind of meaning does that have? Is the artist there? Is the artist on Earth and controlling something that's happening in microgravity? So there's a lot of like doors being open with all of this, and it also opens, our ears and our senses to the universe. The universe has a lot of things to offer. If you look at the wonderful photography that comes back from telescopes up in space, there's a lot of, some might say there's a lot of art in these photographs, even though it's basically just helium and hydrogen just floating in the middle of nowhere, right? But we it makes us dream, it makes us look up, it makes us see hope in the future, and see hope that there, even if you live in dire straits on planet Earth and you cannot see beyond the day, beyond the month, um, and there is a greater place out there that has beauty to offer. And then the bridge between us and that world might be the artists that we send up to the orbital university.
Oh my God, I love that. That is just, wow, I love it. Um, okay, I was thinking we could talk more about Mars because I am fascinated with this, and um, it seems like it's the new frontier. Um, how would you design, what would life look like on Mars and on the moon as well? Like, what would life look like?
Yeah.
How would people live on another planet, on another celestial body? The moon
Yeah.
is a
So we'll
satellite.
take multiple trips before we think about living there,
Mm-hmm.
right? In the long term, or colonizing, as some people use the term. But yeah, like thinking about why we go there. What kind of resources can we grab from the local space? What do we have to send from planet Earth in terms of materials and habitats and all that in order to make the whole thing sustainable? That's a big question. So one thing about a lot of the architectures that are being proposed is that they are, on the surface. You arrive on the spacecraft,
Mm-hmm.
and there's another one that arrives. Typically, you land the thing, you connect pieces together, and then you live in that environment. And typically, each of the modules, some of them are hard shells, some of them are inflatables, kind of have a function. You kind of have a lab connected to perhaps a greenhouse, connected to living spaces, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of like the typical way of thinking about space architecture, and the way I was taught 15 plus years ago. And that's before we even think about the idea of a city, right? If you think very, very long in the future, there will be multiple of these infrastructures connected to each other, and then you will be able to walk or transport yourself from point A to point B, and really live like you're in a city. So a lot of these concepts are on the surface. One idea that has been floated around and is very interesting, and is having underground structures. So the Moon and Mars happen to have lava tubes, which are like very, very large, like natural structures. And what is very beneficial about them is that they are heavily protected from what's happening on the surface. So on the surface of the Moon and Mars, because there is no to very little atmosphere, radiation, surface radiation is quite significant and can be quite dangerous for people to be exposed to. And you can protect yourself somewhat from them, with like water, which is rich in hydrogen and can block a lot of the radiation. But it's never enough that you would freely live around and not put yourself in a dangerous situation. So radiation is one, and then micrometeorites, things like hitting the surface and potentially damaging the habitats you're protecting yourself with is another another threat, especially for the moon. You also have to think about temperature. So the difference between the hottest temperature and the coldest temperature in a day on the moon and on Mars are quite extreme. Again, because of that lack of atmosphere. And that can have a detriment on the durability of the structures that you land on these celestial bodies. So because of the environment that is natural to the surface of the moon and Mars, it might be a better idea to bury ourselves underground, at least to like work and live, and then get out on the surface for certain explorations once in a while. It's not as romantic to have a whole system underground. You don't see what it looks like from the surface, but until we find a way to effectively protect ourselves from dangerous radiation levels, I believe that is the better answer.
Okay, and my question is, how do people adapt to living underground with very little sunlight? I mean, of course, on Mars, for example, there's a lot less sunlight than on Earth, anyways. But I don't know. I'm sure there have been studies done on people living on submarines and probably all kinds of extreme conditions, because for me personally, I know for a lot of people, the lack of sunlight is one of the biggest factors that leads to depression and all kinds of,
Absolutely.
Of mental health issues. So how do you solve for that?
Yeah, so we can actually use technologies for that. We can use VR and environments to create the impression of being in a place that has the sun, for example. We can also use LED lights of different wavelengths throughout the day to provide us with that light, the UVs and everything that helps us. And everything that we used to really is what we're talking about. We also can create the illusion of being somewhere that we're not. For example, you can have a screen that gives you the impression that you're looking at a window and there's bamboo forest or whatever greenery outside, or animals just like walking by. And sure, it sounds like tricking the mind a little bit, but you actually get a lot of benefits from that. There are some people out there who believe that, the astronauts we're going to send out there, they're going to be fine. Looking at the window and seeing rocks, and that might be true, but you have to understand that this is a very long trip, and anything that goes wrong, if you have a bad day and you need to get out and you can't, like what can the environment do to support you when that happens? So instead of solving a very bad problems, let's create an environment that's anticipates a lot of those things. And same thing for food, for example. Yeah, sure, you can give nutritional powder to everybody for like 3 years and they'll survive, they'll be fine. But eliminating everything else sensory to food, like pleasure and texture and color and culture and all these things that enrich our lives every day. If you take that away for long periods of time, that's going to have a psychological negative impact on you. So what I'm trying to say is like everything around you, from the walls to the colors to the scents you surround yourself with, to the impression of being surrounded by nature, to touching certain surfaces and experiencing, textures that remind you of the beach, or walking, barefoot on the grass, or touching moss on a tree, right? All of these things that are sort of part of our lizard brain, like that relaxation reaction is pretty amazing. There's one thing that we're trying to develop here is what we call new nature. So new nature is basically taking natural artifacts, growing things, or taking inspiration from those things to create artificial nature that gives us the same impact as natural nature. Because when you're on Mars, on the moon, it's going to be very difficult to grow everything that you want to grow, right? There are limitations on what it looks like, what it feels like, and how heavy it's going to be to bring all of these things over. So creating the effect of being in a forest without bringing the forest, for example, is part of what we're trying to develop here.
Wow. Would you be able to give me, to show me an example of that would look like? I mean, I would love to put it as a visual.
Yeah, if you go on the Color on the Moon project that's on our
Okay.
website, you can see there's an image where people are walking around, and you can see little plots of moss on the ground and on the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that is what we call new nature. It's not going to be actual moss, right? But it's going to look like it and feel like it. It's going to be randomly placed in environments. And another thing having to do with nature is that if you look at our bodies, if you look at things in nature, nothing has a straight line, right? Straight lines are something that were invented by us. So if you change the geometry of everything, so it's slightly curved, and it's goes from one shape to another in a very natural way, really an ode to natural design. That's going to help with supporting all the benefits that we're trying to put in their environments for the astronauts.
That's amazing. Going back to what you were saying regarding the psychological impact that being in space and not being in touch with nature has on astronauts, there is a really interesting series on Netflix that's called Mars, and they actually mix a documentary with a feature film in which they show exactly what the colonization of Mars would actually look like. It's one of my favorites, and one of the episodes actually shows exactly what you're talking about. There's one scientist, I think he's a biologist, and he's very affected. The storyline is already somewhere in the future where they're already living in these lava tubes, and he is extremely affected by the lack of sunlight and the lack of nature and the lack of living plants around him, and he actually starts having hallucinations, and he starts to sketch out what is his farm from back home for him when he was a child, because he's that affected that he has hallucinations. And then he gets to the point where he believes that the farm is right outside the door of one of the modules that they live in, and he walks outside, and the whole module is obviously destroyed because of the difference in pressure. And I think it's very tragically portrayed in the series, but I think it speaks so much to how we take for granted this planet, and also what you're talking about with nature and with mimicking these textures and these shapes, and trying to simulate nature in a space like this. I think the overview effect at play again, the fact that we take for granted that we have all of this stuff outside and that we've evolved with it, and how important it is, and we're building stuff that is destroying all of it, and we isolate ourselves in these glass and concrete buildings, being completely disconnected from that. And that's how much it matters to us. That's how much our psyche is designed to be in touch with all of this. So I think as we and this is one of the conclusions that I reached, and it was so interesting because I started this podcast thinking, wow, it's all about space and that's what interests me, and it's about Mars. And then I realized, oh my God, this planet that we live on now, that's the most important one. Of course, we can explore, and I think that's phenomenal. But at the same time, it is waking us up, and it's my mission with this podcast and my work in general. I'm very interested in conservation work, to wake people up to just how much this matters to us. Yes, sure, you can extract yourself for a time and go to another planet, which I actually personally would love to go to Mars. I would love to, but I also want to come back. I want to.
Oh yeah.
I want my last days on Earth to be spent by the sea, because there are no seas on Mars, and that's just one of the most extraordinary things I've ever experienced, bathing in the sea. And yeah, we do take it for granted, and I think we need like a really, really big mirror to place in front of ourselves to realize just how much we have. This is the planet we're looking for, and I'm sure at some point we will find Earth-like planets, but that's the key, Earth-like, because that's what we as humans have been designed for. And I was actually thinking about this. I think there will be humans who will love Mars. I'm sure, that we are all so incredibly different. I think there will be people who will thrive in that environment, and we will be able to tweak it. And I think we're meant to get there, and there will be some people who will find it absolutely extraordinary.
Absolutely.
And over how difficult it is.
Well, it is going to be as difficult as the environment makes it difficult, right?
Right.
The more we build, the more we're comfortable with moving around without having to tell 30 people about it. The more we'll be able to live and as you say, thrive, right? Very much like on Earth, there are people who are very comfortable. There are people who are a lot less and are a lot more dependent on their natural environments. And it's all about using human ingenuity to adapt to that environment. Do we want living on Mars to be exactly the same as living on Earth? That's probably not going to happen for a few million years, right?
Yeah.
But is there a possibility for it to be better in some ways? Yes, if we design it to be that way. Yes, if we set up standards of living that are in alignment with who we are naturally as humans. We have beautiful things about humans, we have terrible things about humans, and we have to be honest about what these are before we export them out to a planet, right? A lot of the times when I hear a lot of optimism and idealism about the human race on planet Mars. Sure, we're probably going to start like this, but then eventually we'll start having crime, and then we'll start setting up laws, and then we'll start, getting down the same path as we've been doing on Earth, because it is part of our nature. But yeah, understanding how humans work, understanding how technology can support, understanding what we don't have control over. Like we don't have control over cycles, for example, the seasons. We don't have control over, how fast the Earth or any other planet turns around the sun. We may have control over our own cyclical, cycles, I guess, but with chemicals and all that. But we should never forget who we are as human, and how we're evolving. We will evolve, with time. We have done that for millions and millions of years. And it will continue happening as we continue getting more and more comfortable with partial Earth gravity, as we send more people up there, as we change our diets to fit, whatever restrictions we have with sending a weight to Mars. it will change, but we will, for the most part, stay who we are, right, at the same time.
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about that, and scary and exciting all at once, because we will change, we will evolve. I mean, the humans who will be born on Mars are going to be almost a different species altogether, because they will, yeah, they will have adapted to completely different conditions. Um, and it's
There
very
was,
exciting to see that. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, there was a very interesting thought experiment that was put. I can't remember who came up with it. I was having a chat with them. They were asking whether what would happen first, the first human born in space or the first death by conflict in space.
Wow.
And we genuinely, in the room, we generally didn't know which one was going to happen first.
Wow. That is some food for thought.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's extraordinary. One of my favorite series, I mean, I watch a lot of sci-fi just because I'm so excited to see everything that's in my imagination. And I read a lot of books, but seeing it films is always fantastic. And I don't know if you've seen The Expanse, which is
No, but I hear wonderful things about it.
yeah,
Yes.
it's incredible, and it's set in a time in the future where the moon has been colonized, Mars has been colonized, and they've already colonized um, the asteroid belt, and they mine it, and there's a lot of conflict happening there between all the different factions. They already become, different. I mean, you can see there the differences. I mean, they are all humans, but the humans who are living they're born on Mars, have a very hard time coming to Earth, and they actually use it as a form of torture, bringing people who are born on Mars to Earth because they cannot withstand the gravity. It's absolutely phenomenal to watch. Just how much the imagination of the writer of The Expanse has taken it, and what it would look like. And there's a lot of conflict because people who are living in the asteroid belt, the colonizers in the asteroid belt, are obviously living in very tough conditions, and they don't have enough gravity for the human body to actually be sustained in a decent manner. So they have a lot of health problems, and there is so much conflict, so much more conflict than any of the world wars. It's very interesting to take your imagination there. I hope we have to imagine it so that we can avoid it first. But yes, it's going to add so much more complication to the equation if we have all of these additional planets. Where I think one of the reasons why people want to colonize Mars is to make it easier. We're going to move there, and it's going to be easier. And actually, it's going to be a lot more complicated. We're going to have so many more moving parts. All right. One of the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and by the way, this has been, I just love this conversation, and I love this topic, and I do hope we can talk more about this both online and offline, because I'm geeking out so much over this. One of the ideas that I really thought was very interesting comes from Jeff Bezos. Because Elon Musk is all about let's set up a Mars colony, and Jeff Bezos was saying, well, actually, Mars is going to be really hard. You just you go to Antarctica, and that is a Garden of Eden compared to Mars, and you see just how hard it is to live there. So that will should give you a lot of food for thought regarding the romanticized thoughts about colonizing Mars. I'm sure Mars will happen, but at the same time, what he was saying is, ideally, we would take all heavy industry out into space, and keep Earth as a sort of industry light and residential planet. I thought was just such a visionary idea. And also one of the things that he was thinking about is, he wants to provide the infrastructure for all of these businesses to happen, kind of like the new version of the internet, Like
Mm-hmm.
the next revolution is going to be just like the internet was an absolute revolution for the whole planet. Like creating the infrastructure for people to build businesses in space would be the next version of that, which I thought was so interesting. So yeah, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that because obviously you design for what that would look like.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty wonderful. Wonderful way to see the future. I mean, there's already a lot of startups, different companies developing factories in space, for example, or trying to harvest solar energy directly from space, so it can be used back on Earth. So a lot of these infrastructures, and also mining asteroids or mining the moon, to bring back sometimes to bring back materials that might be useful on Earth, but also to help with the development of settlements. For example, mixing moon regolith with materials that we bring from to 3D structures is very much a conversation that's happening right now. So yeah, I love that idea. And one thing, when you were describing, one thing that came to mind is like, is that going to help humans be closer to the Earth? Kind of like experiencing the overview effect you're talking about, even without leaving Earth, just by seeing more of Earth, right? You don't really see much of Earth when you walk into a dense city, or
True.
a a slum where there's a lot of distress all around you. You focus on other things. But if you take all of that infrastructure, you take all of these things that blur our image of nature, our image of our planet, you know and come back to the idea of spaceship Earth. We are, as Bucky
Yeah.
Fuller says, we are standing on spaceship Earth, and we have to honor it for what it is. And so being closer to that, and being respectful of that, and finding truly sustainable systems that brings abundance to everybody on this planet. Right now with 7.7 billion, we're at 2 billion people in like 2050, I think. I mean, it's, few more decades, it will be 20 billion people, and that's kind of crazy to think about. But I and some people believe that with technology, with the right systems, we can have 100 billion people on this planet and still be able to sustain it, and that's possible. But the only way to get there is to develop technology, and develop it in extreme environments, like other planets, like on orbit and all that, in order to re-import it back to Earth, and make it accessible to everyone. Right. Another thing that's going to be very helpful is completely revolutionizing education, because right now the way education is put together is hindering on on adaptation, on integrating sustainable habits in different industries, whether it's the way you live your life, the way you work, the way countries are run, the way conflicts are happening. There's just so much waste. There's so much harm, and long-term harm too. When you go to war with someone, it's not like you're killing the people, and then that's it. The war is over. The conflict is over. It impacts people for generation upon generation, and then they get angry again, and then get in conflict again, right? How do we get rid of these, again, cycles, vicious circles of conflict and bad habits? I believe we can do that with technology and education. Yeah.
That's amazing. I actually think we should probably have another episode where we just talk about technology and education, because your ideas about education are amazing. So I want to actually hear more about them,
Yeah.
and probably have just like a separate episode on that, so we can elaborate more. Wow. This is great. This is great. This is just everything that we're talking about is everything I'm interested in. And one thought that came to mind while you were talking about resources is there's this very interesting book on economics that's called Donut Economics, and it talks about the fact that the planet is a finite. it has finite resources. But what's interesting to think about is when you start to mine asteroids, to mine other planets, to bring in resources from space, is that suddenly the resources of the planet are not what's given. You can bring water from outer space. You can bring all kinds of materials, all kinds of metals. You can probably take stuff that doesn't, that you don't want on this planet. You can probably take it off planet. I'm sure at some point the costs of doing that will make sense. So who knows? Maybe we're gonna. There's a prize right now. I think Elon Musk gave 100 million to X Prize for carbon capture technology, and I was thinking, hey, who knows? Maybe that carbon, you take it into outer space rather than having to bury it here or to do something with it here. I don't know, but it's all just suddenly you're starting to work with infinite resources, which is incredible, because it's like, yeah, we have finite resources here in some regards, in terms of how much space we have on the planet, but others, yeah.
Well, we have finite resources naturally. Yeah, we're dependent on the sun, on water, on soil, and all that. But with agriculture, for example, today we have access to vertical gardens, indoor gardens that allow us to grow, like, I don't know how many times what a regular field would do, and give access to food to the communities these systems sit in, right? So if it's possible with agriculture, and we're still kind of in the infancy of vertical gardening, how can we do it with everything else? How can we do it with the way we consume everything, from the clothes on our back to the electronics that we work with? There's a way to turn everything into a circular economy. Yeah. We have to break it down. We have to change the way we design things. We have to change the way we assemble them together, and also think about how far they come from. If all these cycles can be a little bit more local, what can happen? Manufacturing itself. There's a lot of delocalization of manufacturing that's happening right now. Robotization, introduction of AI, machine learning. I think we're getting there. We're very far from where it needs to be, obviously, but I think a lot of people are working towards making all of these systems work for us in a way where we use the resources that we have on Earth and just multiply them by a lot. And because of that, because of from a math standpoint, it's possible. Now, can we again educate and educate governments, educate people to want to follow that system so we can develop it together, right? It's going to take everybody's effort for this to happen.
Yeah, well, I think we're getting trained in the everybody together. This pandemic is definitely a very interesting lesson for all of us, and at the same time, it seems like the planet is also reaching a breaking point. So I think we're not going to have much of a choice soon. It's either act now or kaput, which is quite frightening. And I actually love the fact that you were talking about making things more efficient. And I think space technology that's used in space is an extraordinary way to teach that, because that's exactly what you have to do. You have to, when you design, I mean, obviously I'm not a designer, but I imagine that's how it works. You have to be extraordinarily efficient with everything that you do, with every resource, recycle everything. And that's exactly the mindset and the paradigm that we need to operate from. So that's another way in which investing in space circles back to innovation on this planet. And that's how it's worked the whole time. I mean, when they did the Apollo space program, the computers that they used in the Apollo space program, they were wait, let me remember. I think the power of the computer that powered the first module that landed on the moon was something like the power of a microwave. They they milked everything that had to
Yeah.
offer, which was incredible. And then that was the beginning of the computer revolution
Oh yeah.
on Earth. So space always makes progress. It always helps progress. So that's why it's useful and important to pour all that money in space, because it does circle back to Earth a hundredfold in terms of innovation, in terms of what we learned there. So I think that's the answer to that question for any skeptics out there. This has been an amazing conversation. Is there anything else that you'd want to add, that you want to mention, or you want to talk about before we close up?
Oh no, I'm super hopeful for the future of space. You know, my motto is that I want to make the future of space more human, and that has it's not only about sending humans up there, which is already happening anyway. It's going to be the development of space tourism. It's going to be taking over the moon and Mars and all that. That's going to happen. You know, whether you want it or not. Is Can we find a way to use design, good architecture, good technology, good science to make all of this responsible in the long term, right? Because what we want is welcome people in these extreme environments. And we can do it today in extreme environments on Earth, right? So you have structures in Antarctica, you have places skyscrapers built in places that experience earthquakes all the time, that we know how to do some of that. So let's make it accessible in space so we can make it accessible for the communities that need it most on planet Earth.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's moments like these when I remember how much I love my job. It's been
Thank you so much for
incredible.
inviting me.
Yeah, of course. And we're gonna do the episode on education specifically at a later date, because I think it's a very interesting topic to go in depth. So we're going to do that. And in the meanwhile, thank you so much. I will be following your work closely. I think all of my followers will as well, because it's amazing and so inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I will see you soon back on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Sora.
Bye.
I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So we're back. We were going to stop, and then we realized we have more to say. So can you repeat what you just said about space?
Yeah. What I was saying is that space is a great connector, because it doesn't really matter what kind of background you have, how much money you have, how connected you are, how famous or what you are. Space is that, as Star Trek says, the new frontier, and it's something that you look forward to, in the future, in space and time. And because of that, it forces us to innovate in the way we think about things. A lot of the times we think in silos. This is a math problem, this is a physics problem, this is an engineering problem, this is a design problem. But you can't work in silos if you have to solve very complex systemic problems having to do with, sending a rover to Mars or sending people on the moon. You have to have a very open line of communication between disciplines. You have to have connectors, like physical people who put two people in a room and say, now talk to each other. There's something interesting that has never been explored until now, and now is the time. And so my job as a designer and an architect is design all of these things, and I can only do it if I take clues from the science, the R&D departments, the universities, the crazy people, the children who dream of a sustainable future. I take all clues of all these people and put them together in a package that means something to the people we're designing for, right? Even if the people I'm designing for are not even born today, or I will die before they experience it, right? And that's what's wonderful about jobs today. You actually have a job that may have influences on things that go beyond your own lifespan, and I think that's pretty wonderful.
That is amazing. And also I understand now the why also you're so interested in education, because you basically it's all about people. The design is meant to kind of disappear in the needs of people. And if you don't focus on education, then those people will not be able to fully receive what you're trying to create as a vision. So they need
Yeah.
to up level them as well.
Yeah, and one of the big problems with education, especially traditional education, not the more progressive kind, is that it has given a hierarchy of importance to certain disciplines, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've probably heard from some parents who really care about how well their children do in school. Are you going to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or whatever? To them that's more important, probably because it's linked to the idea of being more financially independent. But every job is important. We can't live without art. We can't live without spirituality. We can't live without, all of these other disciplines that give richness to this life. I mean, think of civilizations. People who have lived together and died. A long time ago, and everything that was part of the community has disappeared or is underground. And so you unearth them and realize that they're just always the same things that are left. You have human remains, rituals having to do with burying the dead. You always have architecture or, what's left of it. You always have objects, everyday things that you find in the kitchen. You always have pieces of art. Sometimes you have, written art, whether it's like philosophy or storytelling or whatever it is. So it's always the same things that remain from lost civilizations. And like how many of them are, you know arguments or the little things that make us sweat every day, daily
Hmm.
stress and being late to things like that doesn't matter in the end, in the history of your civilization. What matters is what people have fabricated with their hands and used every day and built the foundation of who they are at the time and who people see them in the future, right? And we have to think today of how people of the future are going to see us, right? What is a child who's going to be born on Mars? What are they going to think of us in the 2020s? Going through the pandemic, living indoors, and there's going to be some history that's going to be developed about this. So how are they going to see the way we live our lives? Very wastefully, not
Yeah.
a big percentage of us not believing that the earth is even suffering in any way. It's you always have to jump in the future, jump back in the past, and learn about what the potential, what can happen in the middle is.
I love that. I'm actually going to take that as the closing to our episode.
Okay.
And I think it's the perfect teaser for our next one, which is going to be
Yeah.
much more in depth about education. I
Yeah.
loved it. Thank you so, so, so much. This was an incredible session. Thank you.
Thank
And
you,
I'm
Sparana.
actually going to close the recording now. So, everybody, we had the most amazing guest. Thank you for following us. And on to the next episode. Take care.